Okay, let's try problem 3.10. Part A, what are the x and y components of vector E of the figure in terms of the angle theta and the magnitude E? Okay, so all we have to do is break this vector down E into its x and y components. So we're looking for this one vector right here, right, E sub x, the x component of that vector. And then we're also looking for the y component of this vector, E sub y. Okay, in order to do this, all we have to do is some simple trigonometry. If you remember, SOHCAHTOA, cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, and tangent is opposite over adjacent. So all we have to do is find these x and y components. So how do we do that? So if we just drop a perpendicular right down here and just make a triangle. To find the adjacent side, we just use cosine, right? So the cosine of this angle, so cosine of theta, is equal to the adjacent, which is E sub x, which we're trying to find, over the hypotenuse, which is E. And then solving for E sub x, which is what we're looking for, is going to be equal to E, right? Just multiply E to both sides, cosine theta. And that's this component right here. Now to get the y component, we want to know the opposite side, right? We want to know this side of the triangle right here, which is going to be the same thing as this over here. So to find that, right, that's the opposite side from theta. We just do sine of theta, because sine of theta is opposite over hypotenuse, which is going to be E sub y over E. And again, just solving for E sub y to get the y component. It's going to be E sine theta. Okay, and those are our two components using the angle theta. So that was part A. So let's do part B now. We're going to be doing the exact same thing and finding the exact same components, but we're given the angle phi instead of the angle theta. So let me drop another perpendicular over here. So now we just have slightly different relationships here between the sides of the triangles. Now just find the x side over here, this side of the triangle. Now that's the opposite side. So now all we do is sine of phi is going to be equal to the opposite, this side over here, which is going to be the same thing as this component, E sub x over E, right? Sine is opposite over hypotenuse. And again, we just solve for E sub x. So E sub x is going to be E times the sine of phi. And that's our x component. Now for the y component, we do a very similar thing. So we want to find this side of the triangle over here. So now we use cosine, right? Because it relates to the adjacent side. So the cosine of phi is going to be E sub y. That's our adjacent side, over the hypotenuse. And again, we just solve for E sub y. Be E times the cosine of phi. Okay, so these are our components. But one thing to keep in mind is the signs on these components. So if you notice, our vector is pointing off in this direction, and which makes our x component negative, right? Because this is pointing in the negative x direction. So we just have to keep track of that, and so all we do is just put a negative here, because those are our x components. Our y components are all positive because they're all pointing, because they point up, whereas our x component points to the left or negative. And that's problem 3.10.